Showing, okay. John Harris, John SISK, major projects. I've also got another colleague, just to confuse you, he's called John as well, John Nichols, who's actually going to co-present with some of this as well. So we're going to play a bit of a sort of tag team between some of the things that we've been doing. But the way that we're actually going to approach this is to actually look at some real projects, both from a tendering or from a work winning stage through to live projects, through to actually having a look at a project that's been completed. And I think it's about being honest and sort of looking what worked there from a lessons learned point of view. You know, that's how you tend to learn. It is a journey, BIM, so if we sort of move on. So what does it actually matter to us? Yes, Andrew has talked about the push-pull, certainly in the UK. We're seeing a lot of push from the government about being at a sort of BIM maturity level 2. You know, there's huge advantages from that point of view, but from our point of view, is we're also getting it from clients that are expecting it, but from a contractor's point of view, we're looking, from our point of view, BIM is actually a process that boosts efficiency and value, and that's what we're looking for. You know, money's tight, tenders are difficult, so we're actually going to focus on some of these projects here, certainly from a pre-construction point of view, which we've won in the last couple of weeks, so they're fairly fresh, through to some that are actually running at the moment. And they're both big BIM and little BIM, so it's looking at from different sizes. It's quite useful to actually look at that. And then looking right at the end at, you probably recognise it, Olympics, where we did a sort of temporary buildings, and BIM was actually used on that building. So if I ask John to actually look at this.
Yeah, this is a project recently we've tendered on, and without, we use Synchro. I'm talking more from the 4D perspective here than anything else. If we didn't have Synchro, we probably wouldn't have got this job. It enabled us to see things which we wouldn't have normally picked up. What you're seeing here is a CGI graphic developed from Synchro, tied into our program. We were able to adapt our program. There's some quite intricate enabling works, which for a builder, we would normally not have seen. River diversions. And just having the facility of Synchro there, if you want to just stop there, you can see to the right of the building, there are two rivers that needed to be diverted. And Synchro enabled us to look at that, to resequence, to rephase, and to recast. And on top of that, it also enabled us to demonstrate to the client and to give the client confidence in knowing how we were going about it. The environmental agency was a key factor in this. This is in the middle of London. Again, these tools, Synchro gave us the ability to take it that step forward. Right. Yeah, I don't think we need to go into more on that.
Again, it's part of the first phase. The first phase was won in the last couple of weeks or so. So it's about work winning. Also, the thing I quite like about Synchro is it's dynamically links to the model. If the model's available at that stage, fantastic. Sometimes it is available, and we can actually use, in this particular case, the structural model. We could actually take that from the consultant and develop it further. You know, you need to add to it, you know, things like site setup, site welfare, logistics phasing, and those sorts of things. So it's a very, very, very good tool. But the good thing about it, it's not throwaway. It's not just a pretty animation. It dynamically links to your scheduling software, so it'll link to Primavera, it'll link to the standard tools that we tend to use, which is Aster Power Project. So it's a very good tool, and it links against a timeline. So just moving on from that, I'll move on to another one that we've literally just won. And this particular project is in Bristol, it's in the UK. It's a mixed housing development, 204 apartments. Again, at the tender stage, to help us win the project, we actually produced a lot of site visits to actually understand the actual site setup. Just sort of stopping it there. We needed to actually understand the sort of egress, being in the sort of centre of the city. lots of problems from a delivery point of view, understanding third party. If you look, I need to sort of maybe use a laser, I think. Both on these sides here, this little bit here is actually known as the Cut, which was a man-made river. It was built in 1804 to 1809. And this is actually a floating harbour. There's also a railway that runs along here. So from a site investigation point of view, lots of issues around third parties, around boundaries, about logistics. So that we needed to be able to actually play that back. So it enabled us to actually understand the movement, from here. It's actually used. There's a bridge that's used quite a lot here from a pedestrian point of view, and this is very, very active. Was existing car park. This is a museum along the side here, but also things like plant and cranage and things like that from a site setup. There is actually quite a nice story about that cut. It was built in 1804 to 1809, took sort of 5 years to build, 3.5 miles, built by Irish navvies and English navvies. And they actually had a party when they finished it. And they actually had, I think it was 2 oxes and loads of potatoes and 600 weight of plum pudding. But also every man had a gallon of beer, strong beer. But what actually happened is the beer actually ran out and it ended up having a punch-up. So then the press gang came in and had to sort them out. But we actually use this, and it's much more simplistic. It's not like CGI. It's a simplistic model. It's more cartoonish, but we can simulate, what's being built, what's being demolished, simulate the actual site setup, the site welfare, the boundaries, simulate traffic movement and so forth. It's a very, very useful tool that we actually use. Moving on to another project, again at a tender stage. I'll just zoom into this little bit. Excuse me, moving around a little bit. This is a CGI. This is Nestle. It's probably one of their largest projects. They've got a £500 million framework. This is £250 million worth of it. 16 different buildings, both industrial, process design. It's where a big extension to an existing factory that's been there for 100 years. 30-acre site, 30,000 litre cube arrangement, but 16 different teams. And the client is actually doing the process design. So huge issues with regards to change. How do I manage that change? Now, when we first rolled up, great, fantastic, everybody's engaged, but it's a different type. It does depend on your procurement routes. In this particular case, it was a 2-stage traditional tender. The design team were not novated to us, but we had 16 different packages that we, as a contractor, needed to control the design. And they were using just an FTP site to collaborate this information. Great the fact that they were doing things in 3D. But right from the word go, we actually used BIM from a concept stage. Great, fantastic. Andy's talked about using programs and so forth. What we actually use on site, it's going to play, is to compare the contract program that we've agreed to against where are we from a design. So we might be held up from a design point of view, but a client was constantly changed. Since we started in, September last year, 1,200 changes, constantly changing all the time. So very, very complex. And you need to be able to change that. You don't necessarily want to sit there as a contractor and say, thank you very much, new variation can I have please, because that's really not the right sort of approach. You want to be looking at value engineering, you want to be looking at giving the best value and efficiency. But we can actually take, certain parts, focus on, and it's dynamically linked to the program. So the program controls the thing. So it's not done in isolation, it controls the design, so you end up with a design, procure, and construct program. Even though the designers are not novated to us, they're all working in BIM. And I think having to set up, where they were using an FTP site, sharing of information is very, very important, and collaboration is very, very important. But this is a very, very good tool to show, well, that's where we're meant to be, and here is actually where we are, because the design has been held up, or there's all these changes. You now decided to move this piece of plant, you know, very, very complicated because you've got 16 different teams, but they're worldwide. You know, Russia, Sweden, Switzerland, all different places. So one thing that we actually brought to the table, we think, you know, when we've actually set this up, you know, from a, how can I say, from a global point of view, from an enterprise, is we actually believe in having a collaborative project. So to help that, I suppose it's the olive leaf, we'll actually train the whole team, you know, at a cost to ourselves, to train the designers. A lot of designers are used to these tools. They use all different sorts, whether it's ASINT, whether it's Buzzsaw, you know, but we actually offer this as a value proposition to say, you know, we can host this information, we can share this information, so we end up with simplified communication. One version of the truth, we say automatic compliance, somewhere in an online collaborative environment, which is quite important around things like PAS 1192 and those sorts of things, to actually have somewhere where you actually control that information so that you're working to the right information at the right time. One thing that we did as well around change control, which you need to keep on top of, because 1,200 different changes, it's complicated. The original process, you know, they actually had just this sort of flow chart that if there's a change, this is what they do. It's a sort of paper chase. You need to be able to actually look at that. They have a standard form, they have their processes, they don't want to move away from it, but they would fill in a form, they would do it manually. We would need to look at the impact on the program, go out to the supply chain and see what the impact was. Are we going to do it? So we actually set up a process within this collaborative environment so that when somebody raised a change, bearing in mind you've got 16 different teams, you know, it's difficult to get a design freeze and get something closed out. That this process would actually capture it and automatically track that process and notify the right people. So you'd have a complete history, an audit trail, the associated change, the associated information around that. Just going back to the previous slide, you know, helping you to increase control. And you could literally go into this environment, click on a change, and it will actually tell you, as you see in red here, where you are in that process. You could set up your own workflows, so whether that's, you know, getting something to a construction issue or sign off or change. So we set up these workflows that when things happen, they would change and you'd have an audit to actually take you through that. So advancements of moving from an FDP site to a collaborative environment. The other things as well, we talked about sort of, Andy was talking about mobile technology. Yes, you know, smartphones, people do a lot of things on smartphones and tablets and things like that out in the field itself. Certainly, we want to be in a position where we can actually go out and see that information in real time. You know, mobile technology is improving all the time, but the ability to actually go out, visualize that information, maybe send an RFI, or take a snapshot, a photo if I'm doing snagging or something, and it goes in, it will create an automatic audit and send it to the right sort of people. So you speed up that efficiency and that process. Again, not enough time to really go into this, but this is something else that we're looking at, certainly from an O&M, and we do have a request, you know, can we have the model, the BIM model at the end, but what is that? Is that a collection of information? You know, is it one big Revit model? Is it IFCs? Is it something based around Kobe? And I think that's something that's evolving, but it is a collection of information associated with that project. And if you look at things like PAS 1192, I think you need to understand what is the employer's information requirements, and actually setting that early in a BIM execution plan to actually get you where you need to get to. I think John's going to talk about this one.
Again, just going back, making use of the tools that are available in using Synchro. On this particular project, we take the contractors on a weekly basis. We run them through the look ahead for the week. What we're going to do, look out for the items where we're going to have potential clashes, where plant is going to be running. So people are well aware of it. These are tools which we probably never had before, which could be graphically shown to people on site, and it gives a major benefit then from a health and safety perspective. If you want to just go on to the next one. Again, this is probably something that John has touched on, Andrew, as well. Running through look-aheads in your work programming, location of cranes, how you're going to be interfacing, different contractors interfacing with each other. These tools are now available using Synchro in this instance, which were never sort of available before.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's move that on to. So, I think just to sort of sum up, I'm sort of going to end on a project that we were sort of main contractor. This is quite a unique one, quite, I suppose, iconic, but not iconic, because the client didn't want it to be iconic, because they didn't want to spend the money. They wanted something that was cost effective. But this was the Royal Artillery Barracks, which was the shooting range where they did, you know, rifle, shotgun, pistol shooting, archery for the Paralympics and so forth. So they wanted, as it says here, something that's cost effective. They didn't really want to pay a penny for iconic. But I think the rules around this were something that I suppose was going to minimise the use of virgin materials and those sorts of things, reuse, recycle at the end, but also reinstate back to a greenfield site in a cost-effective way. So a bit of unusual. Don't make a mess. I think that's kind of where they were coming from a client, from an ODA point of view. I thought the consultants on this job were absolutely fantastic. Mott McDonald's, the architect was Magma, but it was based around almost like the sort of military heritage around bivouac and I suppose tents in a field was the approach. So it's kind of a look at that. It's a picture of the Royal Artillery Barracks. Maybe I should have EastEnders playing here now, I don't know, but just looking, you can see the Millennium Dome, and just from a location point of view, where it is in relation to that. And then sort of focusing on, again, it is about value for money. Originally you had 4 buildings, and the design team actually took those 4 buildings and said, well, we don't need this, let's reduce the footprint. So they actually reduced, you know, amalgamated 2 of the 4, you know, into one building and reduced the footprint by 25%. 25% means 25% less cost, less materials and so forth. So they ended up with a solution around the basis of this, you know, 3 main parts of the building. So just looking at a few of the buildings, quite unusual, temporary structure. They tried to use standard, I suppose, standard trusses, standard columns. The only bespoke part of this was some of the connections in the corners. In fact, the structure that was actually used on here was actually used by Madonna afterwards in one of her concerts, I suppose, which was quite interesting. Or before that, sorry, before that. And then sort of moving from this, sort of looking at some of these, what they call the Olympic rings. They had a sort of multi-purpose. Their purpose was to tension the outside fabric. The fabric was a PVC, again, recyclable, you know, good durability, good tensile strength, you know, good thermal properties and so forth. But it was also about creating no sort of flat spots, so rain wouldn't actually catch, and you wouldn't get that. I think this is probably a better picture. So you wouldn't get those sort of flat spots to collect rain, but also the flapping sounds that you get, maybe distracted when you don't want that happening if somebody's shooting a rifle, I suppose. But also, you know, natural ventilation, you know, the typical sort of stack effect. We're trying to use that. It was double skinned, so we could use that double skin to actually run services and cables through, which was quite useful. Yeah. And also inside, they looked at the ballistics, you know, it's quite interesting. Simple use of plywood. So you can see these sort of baffle-shaped things. This is supposed to prevent ricochets from a ballistic analysis point of view. Again, using the model so that you can actually take the model, optimize it from a manufacturing, from a assembly point of view, simulate the construction. So from a concept stage, they embraced BIM, and we'll have a little look at some of those sort of workflows and lessons sort of learned. So just looking at, this is more sort of simplistic from a design team point of view. This is what they set up, this is what they were looking to do, sort of have a central BIM. We wanted to do the 5D cost plan, which are all the things that we tend to do. You know, 4D from a linking time to a program to simulate those sorts of things, but also from analysis. So they set out right from the word go, you know, quite admirable from even before we engaged, but they brought us in at a very, very early stage. Originally, the clients had a target of 18 months to do the whole thing from a construction point of view. Using BIM, we actually turned it down to 4 months. The client was a bit worried about that, so let's have a sort of 2-month buffer. So we sort of, I suppose, settled on 6 months. So again, reducing the program by 65%. So looking at the sort of workflows, again, this is more sort of process mapping point of view, but from an engineering point of view, yes, you start off with hand sketches. The architect was using Rhino. It's not just about one piece of technology, it's about using different technology and how does this flow from an information point of view. Yeah, yes, they were using Rhino because you've got some very, very complex shapes there, which is quite difficult to do. Yes, they were using Revit. You know, they were using things like Robot from an analysis point of view. But some of these little notes, when they went back to actually have a look at how did this work, did it work well? Not necessarily, we didn't have any MEP model. We didn't have, at this stage, at a concept stage, but it would have been nice to have that information. You know, we want sort of more of the eye, so, you know, can we, eye as in information, can we have that, rather than be just a 3D model that has no intelligence. It's quite dumb, but they still managed to use it, which was quite good. So then moving from that into more the detailed design workflow, again, looking back, there were some good things of what they were doing, mixture of models from a thermal analysis point of view, coordinating using Navisworks, a very, very good tool that I'm sure many of us tend to use. But lessons learned, like the client not telling you exactly what their information requirements were. If it was available, which it wasn't at the time, if there was an execution plan or if the client was open about what they wanted and how they wanted that information. But it's lessons learned. I think if you learn from these projects and then say, next time, maybe we should get that signed up front. It does depend on the team that you have, I suppose, really. Problems of interoperability, moving back and forth, life's never quite good. And then actually going into sort of manufacturing and workflow. Worked very well. Certainly some limitations, using the model straight to manufacturing, quite important. Maybe we should have done it in certain ways, but maybe the information isn't available, but you have to work with what you actually have at that moment in time. And with the capability of your supply chain, which is a very important thing. It's very well saying, I want it all, but that's the level of detail they've got to, which I think is quite commendable, really, which was a mixture of different types of software. So at the end of it, we had to put it back to, back to a greenfield site. It's got a couple of lumps and bumps there, but, it was very much around don't make a mess. And the good thing about it is at least one person won a gold medal. So this is Peter Wilson. I know the date because it's the day after my birthday, which was the 2nd of August. The only gold medal in the, I think it was the shotgun double tap, I think it was. So very good guy. So it wasn't all for waste. And then recycling, where did it all go? So a lot of this can be reused. It's going to be used in Glasgow 2014. So the different setups were actually sold. We took that where we did piling. We used oil and gas pipes from piling. We took them out. We can reuse them on another project. Locally recycled plywood, again straightforward, recycled. And a certain amount of sort of buyback as well. And just to sum that up, we sort of saved, we could have saved a lot more, but I think, could have even been 80%, 65% time saving on the construction, 25% on the footprint. But that's working as a collaborative team. It's not just down to the contractor. You've got to work as a team to actually get yourself there. Advanced sustainability, reuse, recycle, work efficiently with your supply chain. Early supply chain integration is very, very important. Shared BIM model. It's not just about one piece of technology. It isn't just about technology. It is about the information. It is about the process. Sometimes you are where you are, you have to use what you have. Kit of construction, that's not just about things like DFMA, design for manufacture and assembly, it's about what can I go and get a standard part, standard piece of kit. I know they do that a lot with schools now, try and develop something that can work around a grid, but I can use that as a standard kit without reinventing the wheel. Reclaimed materials, obviously safety. Safety is always very important. We don't want anybody getting, during the construction or after the construction, anything going wrong there. So lots of analysis that was actually done like that. We've all seen this graph. It's quite an aspirational thing. I've seen it back 20 years ago where, maximise information value, minimise waste. It's all about waste. They've got this dog tooth effect. We still get it now, the design and dump, or people not wanting to share the information, but it's not as bad. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But ideally, it'd be nice at a tendering stage that yes, I've got a model, I can take that model, develop it in some cases, like Lewisham Gateway, the client was more than happy, have that model, develop it, use it, and it's about that value of information. But you always get this sort of drop off, but I think a lot of it is about understanding. Last but not least. So just to sum up, I think from a SISK point of view, yes, we've consolidated our approach to BIM. We've aligned ourselves group-wise with things like PAS 1192 and industry enabling tools, CIC, BIM protocols. We want a collaborative approach, and that is working as a team. You need to have clear strategies, but I think you need to be flexible. You can't be too, that's the way we're going to do it. So different types of procurement routes, different styles, different approaches, different types of contracts. We've developed our tools that will actually enable us in a sort of online environment to actually take you through that process of developing things like BIM execution plans, both pre-contract and post-contract, so that you can actually shape what your BIM execution plan is likely to be as a team, not just from a contractor's point of view. But I think the approach needs to be flexible on a project-by-project basis for most of our projects. I was going to ask some questions, but I don't think I've got any time, so thank you very much.